Welcome. Welcome to my talk about RESTful APIs for Liferay. And what I am really hinting at with that kind of title is that we don't have REST APIs in our product. Now, if you Google for like Liferay and REST, it seems like I may be wrong with that one because like there's people sending HTTP requests to Liferay to certain URLs and they get back JSON. Isn't that REST already, right? So very quickly about myself. My name is Daniel Reuter. I'm working as a senior consultant, as my colleague already mentioned, and I still have these conversations with customers of ours that, you know, from time to time, they are telling me, like, your APIs are not RESTful. We shouldn't call them RESTful. It's hard to use them with like other frameworks, like modern web frameworks, Angular, or whatever you name it. And well, that we've broken an API again, like these kind of discussions. And this talk that I'm about to give is more sort of the theory behind concepts, hypermedia. And the things we've been building for 7.1 that is coming out pretty soon. It is more about, to get you excited about hypermedia and the concepts behind that rather than a specific feature though. And what I mentioned earlier, I do agree. I feel like we've broken plenty of APIs over the years. And of course, that's not only us. Like there's lots of companies breaking their APIs all the time. But the question is, why is that? So here's an example that I've run into not too long ago. It's an API for adding tags. Looks pretty straightforward, right? So you give it a tag name, some properties, and you're done, right? Then this happened. Like the screenshot in the background is from our breaking changes document. And it says that we have, we got rid of tag properties, right? So we have been deprecating that in 6.2 already, and with 7.0, we decided to finally get rid of it. So what you get is a new API. It looks much simpler this time. You only need a tag. But the downside of this is that it's not true, because actually for a tag, you also need a group ID, right? A group ID is a required thing. So that's when LPS 54570 happened, and we have added the group ID as a mandatory parameter to that URL. So we've changed the same kind of method functionality twice, more or less, and what you get at the end looks pretty different from what you've started with, right? And of course, that renders clients, non-functional. Like every client that is relying on that API becomes non-functional, and you have to adjust it. Of course, that doesn't mean that APIs should never change. That's not true. Like in an evolvable or evolving product, it's natural for the API to change too. But the question then is, how can we make sure to not break clients all the time? Here's a quote from Roy Fielding. That's the gentleman in the background there. He is one of the original authors of the HTTP specification, and he is the one who came up with the term REST, right, in his dissertation, well, quite some years ago. And he's saying that people are fairly good at short-term design and usually awful at long-term design. Most don't think they need to design past the current release. So what he's really saying with that is that we are coupling our APIs too much to our implementations. The context for this was that he was discussing people misusing the term REST. So if he uses that quote in a discussion about what's not REST, maybe we should talk about what he and other people think REST actually is. So This is a model from Leonard Richardson from 2008. It is sometimes referred to as Richardson's majority model. How many people have heard of that already? How many know that? It's not too many. So it consists of different levels of compliance, and they are supposed to tell you how RESTful your API is, right? So for level 0, we're talking about like protocols that use HTTP just as a tunnel, right? They don't use any HTTP specific functionality. They don't use verbs like put, patch, delete. And they usually only come with like a single URL to like address their endpoints, right? Their API. SOAP is one of these protocols. There's other RPC style protocols that do the same thing. Now, if we start our journey to a more RESTful API, we'll have to introduce URLs, right, for specific functionality. But of course, just because we put a URL on some arbitrary behavior in your implementation doesn't mean that you're any closer to a more flexible API, right? Liferay's JSON API is somewhere in between those two. We do kind of have different URLs for services, but we are not resource-oriented at all, right? I mean, probably everyone knows our JSON web services, right? And there's this thing that URLs, according to like what people like Richardson or Fielding say, should only contain nouns. And if there are verbs inside your URL, that's usually a sign for unrestfulness, not being restful. And we have plenty of verbs in our API. And that's because our API is auto-generated from the Java code, right? All right, so at this point, it's maybe a good idea to look at where we're coming from, to have like a very brief look at our JSON APIs. Give me a second. I need to do it full size. Can I? Oh, it is already. Hello? I can't resize it? Okay, no, I'll just put it here. Let's see. I need a REST client for that, of course, to show you something. All right, maybe a little bigger, I guess. Is that okay? All right, so what we're seeing here is a very simple request. It's targeting our JSON API. It's just retrieving a single block entry. So, and if I run that, then what I get, I hope that's kind of visible. Why is that window so off? Is it visible? Yeah, I guess. It's because it's over the screen. Maybe I can have it a little smaller or something. Let me see. Can I clone my screen? Maybe that's better. All right. No, it's not better. Anyway, maybe I have my window smaller. I don't know. Yeah, all right. So anyway, so this is a very simple API for returning like a single blog post, right? And then there's this functionality that I have seen customers not using as much because they just simply didn't know about it, where you can combine calls. Like if you scroll down here, you see that like a blog post consists of like, lots of different properties. One of them is the user, right? There is a user ID over there. And what if I'm interested in that particular user, right? I would either have to go through a second call, or I say, I can augment that, and I can say that I'm actually, that I'm interested in like the user, and I will retrieve that in the same call. So I can say, user, and then the user endpoints, I'll say user get user by ID, and I will, and I add, like I need to pass it a user ID, of course, right? So I say user ID, and that is retrieved from the block post, from the block, right? So I say block user ID. And if I then run that again, I will see that the whole user object got embedded in that single request. Who of you actually knew about that functionality? That you can, combine HTTP requests? No one? All right. That's why I think it's worth to show it. Like most people didn't know that. Like they would run like multiple HTTP requests, right? Another interesting thing maybe is this one. So this is a very, very simple call. This is just get. It's just retrieving the number of blog posts from a specific group. So if I run that, it will tell me 7. So I have 7 blog posts in that group. And then I prepared this kind of post method where I show, like, where I add a blog post, right? And if I run that thing again, then, I get back the entity that just got created, so the blog post, and if I run the post again, it will tell me 8, right? But the thing is, if I now run that same method again, the post method, and again, right, and then check it, it's constantly increasing it. So it is not safe at all to execute that method, multiple times in a row. Let me go back to my presentation. Where was I? Here. Oops. Hello. Okay. Yeah, finally. Okay, sorry for the technical issues here. Yeah, so, it's not safe to execute that post method again and again. That's because post is not an idempotent method, right? And what idempotency means is actually a mathematical a term that it just means that you can run an operation again and again, and it's going to, not do anything else apart from or beyond the first execution. So it's safe to do it again. And that gets us further to a more stable API. Like if you, use a verb like put, that's an idempotent verb according to the HTTP specification. So you can run that again and again. Even if you get a timeout or there's an error in between, you can just run it again, and you can be safe that you can be sure that you're not breaking anything. So what I'm getting at with this is that HTTP, or making use of more functionality of HTTP, it actually gets us a more stable and more robust API. And that's what level 2 is about. As I said, if I call an API with an idempotent verb, like get or put, then if it didn't work, I'll just try again. Level 2 APIs are actually very, very common. We see them all over the place. Microsoft does it, Google does it, other companies do it. And one thing that can give away that it's actually a level 2 API is that little V1, V2, V3 in the URL that you see, because that means it's referring to a specific version of the API, a specific contract in time. And whenever you deprecate an old version, it means that your clients implementing that API need to go through a certain effort to keep up, right? So the question then is, wouldn't it be nice if we could just evolve our APIs without breaking clients all the time? And this is what Richardson, in this case, defines as a level 3 API. It comes with a notation, with a notion of hypermedia. Now, what is hypermedia? Anybody here that thinks he has a very good understanding of hypermedia, or at least a solid understanding? Okay. Again, not too many. So when the REST community is looking at Hypermedia as a constraint for building RESTful APIs, what they are usually aiming for is a thing called HATEOAS. Now, what is HATEOAS? First, it's a terrible acronym, but apart from that, it's Hypermedia as the engine of application state. So this is one of the REST constraints. What it means is that I am delivering every state and behavior I'm able to do with that API in band. So theoretically, that can save me from like documenting lots of things because they are in band. They're not, like documentation out of band, but they're in band in the in the API, right? So the control flow of what I can do with that API is defined by the transitions, right? And those transitions are expressed with links or forms. Now, that sounds pretty similar to the web, right? I mean, that's what you can do in the web. You can click around from hyperlink to hyperlink. And it is actually pretty similar to the web. The web is made up of, Hypermedia, types. And it means that I have less assumptions on the server resources. I'm not bound to them. So that means, in the end, looser coupling between clients and server and better evolvability, right? And what it gives me, too, is a sort of discoverability, right? I can go through my API and discover certain things. So here's something that we've built on top of the new APIs that come out with Liferay 7. It's based on Talent, right? It's a Talent plugin. Talent is like a data integration platform. So what you see is that we define an endpoint with a Talent plugin. We point it to the new API down there. And then it discovers the available entities. You can just select them, for instance, like blocks in this case. And then it creates an output file, which is this Excel file, right? And you can directly map data from the API to the output file, right? And if you run that thing, it's going to produce an Excel file for you that just takes the output of the API, right? So once that's done, you have an Excel file and you see the output, right, from our block service. Of course, there's more functionality in that. Like you can have multiple outputs. Like in this case, there's a map in between. That's the relevant part. Like if we look at that map, you can see that you are mapping properties from our service to the specific outputs. So there's different outputs. You see how they are mapped, to which fields they're mapped. These kind of things, right? You have a drag and drop functionality to put the properties into the output that you want to have them in. And if you run that, you would produce that kind of output. And of course, the other way around works too. So I can take an input file like an XML file and map that to a service so that I can import from an XML file to the blocks service, right? So this has been something that we've been building recently on top of these new APIs, right? All right. So Mike Amundsen is, regarded as one of the API experts, and in order for this discoverability to work, we need some kind of standard, right? We need some kind of format that both the server and the client understands. And what Amundsen says is that hypermedia types, which is the format I'm talking about, are MIME media types that contain native hyperlinking semantics, right? That's the important part. We need the semantics for that. And those can induce an application flow. For example, HTML is a hypermedia type, XML is not. So, and he's totally right? So there's no functionality in XML for linking resources. But there is in HTML, of course. We all know that. So he then, starting from that, from those hypermedia types, got into what he called H factors. So he classified hypermedia types, and I will tell you in a second why this is relevant for us. He classified hypermedia types in this sort of schema, where he has like the control data elements on top and the linking providers on the bottom. And he was also the one, just that's a very quick story. He was also the one to come up with this hypermedia mazes, right? There you see that type called maze plus XML. And that's actually what he did was he created a media type that is a hypermedia representation of a maze, right? That you could go through. So there's also a bunch of clients like JavaScript clients and other types of clients that can actually solve these mazes, just purely based on a hypermedia type. But of course, maze XML is not the only one. There's like many types. The ones that are really relevant for us is hull, because that's the one we will be implementing in 7.1. We'll have hull, that you see the third one from on the top row, and JSON LD with some Hydra, right? But you're of course open to welcome to implement more types. So these are going to be the ones that we'll have in 7.1. They will be available, and clients can pick from any of those two, right? For the actual acronyms that are in those H factors, you can read that up, but so essentially it tells you what capabilities a certain format have. For instance, LE means that you can embed links, like that you can pull in resources into your own format, right? While as LT, for instance, means that you have a certain templating functionality in your media type, and that you can construct URLs with, by the use of templates, and so on. So there's different kinds of functionalities, and different kinds of media types support different functionalities. So what Emerson, the guy that we were just talking about, also said was that shared vocabularies are a very important part of HATEOAS, right? HATEOAS, we remember, is that kind of thing that tells our application, or is a model for an application of, just driven by hypermedia. And this is schema.org, and it's essentially a website that's collecting schemas for structured data. It's an effort by Google and Microsoft and Yahoo and all the big players. And right now you can find an enormous amount of reusable vocabulary there. And this is also what we'll be using for our hypermedia APIs. So because the thing is, with APIs in general, it's better to expose, to not expose internal entities, right? So you always should use a vocabulary that you can evolve in the future. That's why we are using standard types from schema.org. And if you have to use custom entities, then really only do that when absolutely necessary if you're building your own APIs, and don't use technical terminology, right? So here's an example for our blocks entry that we have in Liferay. We would say it's a blocks entry. Schema.org calls it a block posting, right? And then the properties for that entity, for us, it's called title. For schema.org, it's called headline. We call it a user. Schema.org calls it the creator, and so on. So we are mapping these kind of properties from a database of shared vocabulary to our own entities. And now, I guess it would be good to see what this new API is about. I will quickly try again to share my screen. Maybe this time it's not as complicated. Let's see. How? So, all right, let me see. I guess that's readable somehow. If I make that a little smaller, does that get us anywhere? Yes. Let's do it like this. That's okay, I guess. All right. So what we see here, that's the same kind of editor we've seen before. If I, that's our new API endpoint. It's called, /o/API. And if I run that query, what I will get is, can I make that even smaller or something so that I can actually see something? All right, what I get here is like a representation of all the endpoints. So that's JSON home. It tells me what root resources this service delivers. So currently, in this kind of version that I'm running here, which is of course not a released version, we're exposing persons, websites, and organizations. And websites map to sites within Liferay. So there we can see the hypermedia capabilities. So what I can do is I can follow those links, right? So I will just say my next point is that I'm following that link /p/website. Of course, I need the API authorization for that. So I'll just put that here, run the query, and then I will be in, I will need to resize that to actually see something, right? Then I will see that I get back lots of metadata for my sites. It's actually a list of sites that I have in my instance. And I can also see something that is also very handy to have, because those results, like lists of things, they are paginated by default, right? And if I want to go from one page to the next, well, right now I don't have pages here because I only have 2 sites in that instance. But if I would have pages, it tells me exactly the link to follow in order to get to the first page, to the last page, to the next page, right? So pagination more or less comes for free with that kind of format. All right, and then what I can do is from the sites, I can follow a link to get, for instance, if I scroll down, to get, for instance, blog posts, right? So I'll just take the next URL. That looks like a lot of manual work, right? But it's, for a client, of course, it works completely different. But in this case, I will just follow the link. Of course, I forgot an H. Then I get back like lots of metadata about a single blog post, right? Again, well, not the single blog post. This is for a list of blog posts that I have in the system. It should be the 9 that we, that was the wrong site, actually. So I have 2 sites. One of them does not have blog posts. The other one has. With all the blog posts I have in my system, let me quickly run the last query again. This one, no. Let me see, this one. Right, because I need, oops, I'm sorry, I marked that, run it, right. Because I actually need the blog post of the other side to show you what I wanted to show you. This one, I hope. I'll just put that here, run the query again, and I hope this time I get 9 total items, right? So that's the right side now. I get 9 total items. And what I can then do, well, first I see, well, there's lots of metadata for like the specific posts. I can follow more links to like the creator and the author resource. So that's when I'm going to end up at like a user, user object, more or less. But I can also embed these resources, right? So if I say, like, for my blog postings, I want to have a specific author embedded, right? I don't want to have another call for that. I just want to have that embedded. I will say embedded author, oh, no typos, please, and then run the query again. And if I then scroll down, I'll see that the author has been embedded somehow. Where is it? There it is, right? The whole author object with all the metadata is now embedded in that call, so I don't need to do another call. I can just say embedded author, and yeah, then I will see that. Is it actually okay if I zoom down a little bit? Can you read that in the back still? Okay. All right, so, and what I can also do is switching between the media types, right? I said that JSON LD and HUL are supported by default. If we look at our response headers, we see that we just got back LD, JSON LD, right? If I want to switch to another format, all I need to do is say accept application /HUL plus JSON and run the query again. And then the server returns a completely different media type. So this type, so over here on that side, we see application HUL, right? So now it's a different media type that we got back with kind of different functionality and so on. And with regards to that, what I said of reusable media types and like the benefits I get from that reusability, there's something, something very nice actually with regards to HUL, because there is a HUL browser, right? Let me see if I can share that. There is a HUL browser that works in a browser, which I can point to exactly the same API endpoints, right? So if I say like API and I run that, what I get back is, well, the same output. I can say, I just wanted to prove to you that actually it is really reusable, these kind of things, right? So if I run that, I need to be logged in, which I am currently not, apparently. Let me see, I need to log in. Come on. Well, okay. So this is 7.1, right? I have to log in, go to my HUL browser, go, and then I hopefully get back, exactly, I get my sites, right? I have 2 sites in the system, and from here, I can literally, it's way easier, of course, to show you, because I can actually click, right? The things that I'm interested in, the last time I clicked on, I navigated to blog posts. Here, I'll just click the button. I'll get all my 9 blog posts. I can, open those, can look at the author. It's going to do another call, and I'll get back all the metadata for that user. And that's not something we have built, right? That HUL browser is not something we have built. This is available on GitHub from someone else, because HUL is a reusable media type. All right. Let's go back. Right. Oh, and one more thing, maybe it's worth to show. You can actually retrieve all the available resources by going to another API endpoint. Let me see if I can quickly demonstrate that. Let me see if I can share my screen. This one. So if I go to get localhost /API doc, right? So I'll do that. /doc. You can see that from the back, right? Can you? Okay. If I go to that endpoint, it's going to deliver me a whole list of every available resource from that service, like from our API in Liferay. So for 7.1, we're aiming for around 30 entities that will enable you to do like lots of use cases already, we hope at least. That's for the, well, one thing we're looking into right now is headless CMS use, right? And we really want to make sure that we enable people to use Liferay with frameworks like Angular and these kind of frameworks. So this is going to be part of 7.1, definitely. So as I said, so for us, Apio, that's how we call it. That's how the project is called within Liferay 2. For us, Apio is the way to HATEOAS, right? Apio itself is an open source project. There is like comprehensive guidelines for Apio, for building APIs with Apio. Right now, it's like a 30 pages something document where we want to give you hints of how to build reusable APIs. It's going to consist of an API architect. That's what we would like to call it. It's a server-side library built into the portal. It's built on top of JAX-RS. And as I said, for the beginning, we'll support HAL and JSON-LD with some Hydra, for you to build your clients with. But it's not only the server side, we also want to build Apio consumers. These are going to be client libraries available for how long? Okay, sorry. Available for web, Android, and iOS. And just to give you a hint of how, usually I think showing code in slides is not that useful, but because you can look it up, right? But for this case, just to show you how easy it's going to be with the architect to build APIs, you just map more or less properties to actual methods within Liferay. And then, of course, you also need to define which of these things yield, are getters, which are used to delete entities, and which are used to, let's say, update entities. And that's what you define in the item routes, right? As I said, all of this is going to be part of 7.1, and with this, it's part of the beta release too. So please, if you have a chance, just check it out. I encourage you to provide feedback on it. If you find it useful at all, and what we may have to improve. So with this, I don't know if there's time for questions.
Yeah, 1 or 2 questions would be fine.
Okay.
Is there any security issue by exposing all of this information?
Not more or less than what we've been doing already, or what's done via the web, like the HTML representation. I mean, what we've been saying for the JSON web services too is we're exposing our whole API more or less with that, while Apio APIs right now are manually, written. So they are, very different. With the JSON WS stuff that we've had for years in the portal already, or in the product, we're exposing more or less our whole API. And because there's the same kind of permission checks in front of those that you also have when you, click stuff in the UI, I don't think it's an additional, security risk. But of course, you can lock things down. You can, probably you also know that we have a UI for the JSON web services. Most customers do block access to that API via their proxy web server, just to make discoverability harder for someone, trying to find out about the API. But the risk itself is actually not higher than what you have in the portal already. Right.
Another question?
There's one here at the front.
Will JSON WS APIs be maintained, deprecated, or erased in 7.1?
They will certainly not be erased. I don't know about any plans to deprecate them. I don't think so, but at least definitely not for 7.1, because that we would already know, I guess. They are still available. The UI is still available in 7.1. Everything's still there. And I don't know of any plans. And we cannot, because, those are auto-generated. It's the whole API that we expose. And for Apio, it's just a subset right now.
Encore des questions?
Does the authentication protocol stays the same? Single use basic auth?
Basic auth is just one option. In 7.1, we'll introduce auth 2 support. So you can actually create auth tokens for clients too. Like if you want to use that in like a mobile application scenario, you can or you should probably use auth2 because it's kind of the de facto standard right now we have for like mobile app authentication. But you can use like other authentication methods too, like basic auth, like I used. You could theoretically also use cookie authentication.